Welcome back to a live reading of The Effigy of Love, as written by Tony Sherblom and read by Juho Hankala. This is Chapter 16, Eyes in the Dark. The following dark days, Endrik spent confined to his chambers, tending to various menial tasks, all while plotting how to break the chains and escape his grey hell. But though he was left all alone for hours upon hours, it was hard to think, hard to be. Somehow everything had gotten worse in a matter of days. His mind perpetually shouted abuse at itself, while the silence around him was thicker than the walls of the castle, broken only by the tolls of the bell every hour, or the light feet tapping over the flagstones around his chambers. Verana's detestable way of tending to her duties, never leaving him in peace. She was like a rash on his back he could not reach, one that only grew larger and more irritating each time he was reminded of her existence. Though she hardly uttered a single word, and moved like a shadow while attending to her duties, Endrik constantly felt as if she was watching him, judging him. Myrtle. Oh, that ascended angel. Though chatty as she had been, she had always afforded him comfort and a peace of mind while present. Her words were like a mother's gentle stroke on the cheek, a thing Endrik barely recalled. Verana's seemingly perpetual presence, on the other hand, only made Endrik tense up, and his mind clouded. The worst part of it was that there was no way to leave with her shadow at his back, and his patience was running thinner by the hour. What added to the vexation was that while everything in Endrik's grey world had changed after Myrtle's death, nothing in the castle had changed. Everything and everyone continued as if Myrtle had never even been part of the castle. No one mentioned her name, nor had there been any talks of funerary arrangements. It was as if she had been a block of ice in front of a hearth, melted away and been absorbed by the ground. Endrik hated the thought of it. She deserved so much more, that angel of heaven. If anything, she had been the hearth that should have melted this castle of ice to the ground, along with all of its inhabitants. If anyone ought to be dead, it should be Verana, for sabotaging his escape, for always being in his way. Even now, sitting by his desk, longingly looking through the window, he could hear those light footsteps stalk the halls behind that curtain of silence, could feel her eyes in the dark. No, Endrik said to himself, as he noticed his thoughts growing darker and the fire in his veins burning hotter. He couldn't afford these thoughts or feelings right now. He had to extinguish the flame of rage, shove his grief and memories into a box, lock it away in a corner of his mind, and put on a mask of arrogance and greed, and join the other actors on stage. Myrtle was not happy being locked up. Endrik knew it and felt it, but he could not take any risks now that he was so close to escaping. Though the mask was heavy and ugly, even thinking about ignoring the grief and pain made him feel nauseated. It would only aid him in his endeavors if everyone else thought he had grown callous. He looked into the mirror and saw his blank, pale face. The sight was as relieving as it was painful. No one would suspect him of conjuring any treacherous plots, for indeed he looked just like them. He felt the mask slipping as the endless misery started pressing up his throat. Somehow, his whole life had turned upside down in only a few months. First, her entering his life and filling him with boundless joy. Then, Myrtle's abrupt passing and the secret grief that followed. And finally, the ultimate escape and blissful reveries it inspired. There were so many things to carry within, too many secrets to keep hidden, and the longer he stayed at the castle, the bigger the risks were that his secrets would be exposed. And secrets can only hurt you. The door suddenly swung open, and the sound of patting feet over the flagstones in his drawing room echoed around him. Swift as an autumnal storm, his whole body tensed up, and the mask settled onto his face once more. As soon as the footsteps silenced, he could feel the needles in his neck as Verana's cold blue eyes ran over him. Instinctively, he shut the ledger and stared at the leathery cover. What if Verana noticed the journal tucked between the pages? What if she snuck up on me while I'm deep in thought? Had she noticed something was off? Or why was she so silent? Crippling paranoia seeped in through the holes left by Verana's pin-sharp gaze. Endrik felt as if he was being watched from all angles, as if the darkness in the corners of his room had grown eyes. The taste of iron soured his mouth, and his breathing grew shallower. "Don't you have anything better to do?" Hendrik suddenly spat, as Verana threw another log into the hearth, making her shadow dance madly on the walls. "Go, leave. The place is warm enough." Verana stood frozen in her place. Only an impossibly cold fire twinkled in her eyes as she looked at him. The burning hearth behind her back made her seem like a ghost in the dim drawing-room. Then, even though it should have been impossible to discern, Hendrik could have sworn that he saw a vicious smile tugging her lips as she straightened her back and silently left. Several heartbeats after the door had closed, Hendrik continued staring into the drawing-room, ears acutely concentrated on her footsteps as they grew ever more distant, silent. Yet still it felt as if he had eyes upon him and could hear footsteps all around him. It was an annoying sensation that made him want to tear down the walls and poke the eyes out of whatever or whoever kept watch. He hungered down over the ledger, shielding it from the gaze of the invisible eyes around him, and opened it to reveal his journal and his master plan. Though the paranoia and fear had been crippling, at times it had also worked like a whetstone, constantly sharpening his blade of determination. And tonight, after 4 days of plotting and scheming, he was ready to unsheath his sword and strike true. Hendrik pushed himself up from the desk and headed to the cupboard. He tucked his hand behind it and started pulling out clothes he had secretly stowed away. Buttoning his shirt and tightening the straps on his bulky warm clothes, he walked up to the window and looked longingly through it. The snow that had fallen 2 days before had melted into slush, and the thick clouds blackened out an already dark, wintry evening, but within him shone the same meager light as in the forest. The twin stars, his guide and love, beckoned him to make haste, made his heart pound harder and his thoughts grow restless. "I'm ready." Though he had spent countless hours scheming, he had in truth gotten literally nowhere. And how could he? He didn't know where they were going, which meant he didn't know how long he would be walking or running. He had no idea what he needed or should take with him, nor had he no previous experience of living outside the castle walls. All he needed was her reassurance that they would reach safety and make it as far as humanly possible from this cold, grey place. Truth be told, the less he thought about the task ahead, and the more he trusted her, the safer he felt. Besides, the less he took with him, the fewer reminders of his past he would need to carry with or within him. "All I need to take with me is you." Hendrik looked to the sky, the picture of the heavy box of grief hidden away inside of him, as comforting as it was gloomy. If Myrtle was still alive, she would have been left all alone in the castle. Or maybe she would have come with him. She would have had no reason to stay, so maybe... Hendrik's whole body shuddered, making his skin go gooseflesh at the thought. "No, you deserve so much better than this." He took a deep, calming breath, erasing all unnecessary thoughts and sharpening his mind. Closing his eyes, he could feel her calling in the darkness, magnetic in her pull. The fire in his heart burned like a small star, its whole being wanting to fuse together with the twins that were her eyes. Hope tickling in his bosom, he took one last look at his open journal. Escape. It was the only word written repeatedly over dozens of pages. His simple master plan. Smiling dreamily, he pocketed the journal close to his heart, blew out the candles on the table, and pulled his hood up. Standing by the door to his chamber, he put his ear to it and listened to the silence, became a part of it. He tugged the door open so as to keep the hinges from wailing at his departure, and snuck into the dimly lit corridor. Before he even realized it, he was already speeding toward his secret exit and his dreams. His feet were like the beating wings of a raven, black, soundless and swift as he ran, stalked, climbed, and skipped his way to the edge of the forest. Hendrik pressed his back against the wide elm and watched his heavy breath mist in front of him. His chest convulsed and burned with a searing pain. Everything had happened so fast that Hendrik had forgotten to breathe. His heart beating against the silence of the night, he threw one last venomous look upon the black castle walls, hoping it would incinerate, along with its inhabitants. To think He had been a prisoner of that place for all his life, when it was this easy to leave it all behind. The thought made Henrik feel both happy and sick. He could have done this years ago, could have been spared so much suffering. Then again, not before now did he have his twin stars as guides. A way and direction to go through the destination was unknown. A cold breeze tugged at the hem of his cloak, pulling his attention toward the forest. Facing the void, he saw her eyes beckoning him with their golden radiance, making his heart race even harder as the lust for life and love started to burn away all the shreds of his past life. As he ran toward her, he could feel the grey taint trickle to the ground like thawing ice, revealing his true colors underneath it all. "I'm finally back, and for the last time, my love." As he closed his eyes and surrendered himself to her, he felt his steps grow lighter and lighter until he was weightless. Felt her pulling him through the woods as if they were flying. Felt how they rushed past the trees, over the rocks and roots, and finally streaked upward like falling stars in reverse. In the absolute darkness that was the edge of time and space, he saw nothing except her, radiating with a million shades of happiness and love. And that was exactly what he wanted and needed. Her alone. He drank in her infinite presence, filled his lungs and whole being with what was her. The thought that a creature of ultimate love, such as her, was equally eager to have him join her was unfathomable, like a fairy tale yet true. Smiling where he floated weightless, he reached out toward her, and as their fingers interlocked and their lips met, Henrik felt himself erupt into a million shades of love and relief, felt himself turn more into her, and leaving what once had been him behind. They were the only souls in the cosmic ocean, two lost stars finally aligning, entwining into one brilliant sun. He had made it. He had been reborn into a celestial being, one that would shine its colors upon anyone that reached out from the grey, seeking the same escape and comfort as he once had.